As a therapist, I actually thought that before those things had happened, that I would have all the tools I needed to be able to tackle moments like that. But to be honest, like, I did not. I didn't. When you're in it, it's really hard to remember, even as a therapist, what would be helpful. How do I survive this? How do I help my kids through this? So on the heels of having experienced these things, I feel like I've learned a lot that I feel really inspired to teach people, to show people, to help people with. And that's really what this video is meant to introduce. I won't be able to cover it all in one video, but this channel is really dedicated to the work that I feel inspired to do, having learned a lot through the process of navigating great upheaval in my life and through the process of helping other people navigate upheaval in their own lives. And one of the first things that I really want to convey, especially with Mother's Day on Sunday, is that it all really begins with the ability to remember and harness the healing energy that exists within all of us, and what I'm going to call this maternal nurturing force that exists within all of us. The ways that we show up for ourselves in the moments when our bodies are in a place of flooding or overwhelm or shut down or high alert or whatever the case may be. The nervous system responses that we tend to have in difficult moments and in the aftermath multiple times a day sometimes, as we're sort of like healing from the initial shock. The way that we respond to ourselves has so much potential for healing, and I feel like this is an untapped resource for so many people. It was for me in the beginning as well. When we are really knocked off our feet and then having to learn how to stand back up and move forward in our lives, what I've noticed is that it's key to develop a very attuned relationship with ourselves. And by that, what I mean is there is a part of us that is very much hurting in those moments. And there's also a part of us that is very much able to nurture. It may not feel like it's available immediately, but it is available. And our ability to harness it gets stronger the more that we practice it. So you can imagine this as like our hurting side, as this inner child that really requires love and care and attunement, that really needs someone to notice, hey, I'm hurting. Can somebody see that? Can somebody respond to me? Our inner child is very, very young energetically. And then there's this side of us that always looks out for ourselves, that knows what we need, that knows how to love and care. That I'm going to call this maternal force, this maternal energy, that we can bring to bear in order to offer some inner healing, inner nurturance, and inner parenting in moments of great need. And so what this can look like in the moment is, I'll give an example. Let's say a wave of grief is hitting. It's hitting you in your body, you can feel it. The first step for me is really about noticing that. So many times we just sort of plow through the day and ignore these moments where we're being asked to really stop and be present with a wave of something that is hitting our nervous system. The first step to me is really learning how to stop and witness that. Witness the fact that in this example, a wave of grief is knocking me on my knees again. I need a moment to really stop and witness that this is happening. So maybe in a practical sense, if you can, and it may take some arranging, that means setting aside some time to be with yourself. It may literally mean, if you're driving your car, pulling over and sitting with yourself. That's how immediate I'm talking. Think of a baby that's crying. They want your attention immediately. And what really can be so effective with babies is to be attuned and responsive to those needs, to those signals. So it's very similar when it's happening inside. Stop and notice, and then carve out some space, right? And then step 2, moving on from there, is really to sort of like hold ourselves in that place. And by that I mean, while we are riding the wave of that emotional experience, that we really almost imagine ourselves as being able to bring this maternal energy into that moment, and all it's doing is really being present. It's just witnessing the fact that this wave of intensity is hitting our really young and fragile inner child part. And we're just sort of there saying, I'm here. I'm seeing, I'm with you. I'm seeing this too. I'm feeling this too. Almost creating this container of safety and just presence. When we're really hurting, and even if somebody else were to be able to offer us this, we often don't need for them to come in and solve anything. We just need for them to come and be with us and sort of just send a message through their presence. You're not alone in this. I'm with you. I'm witnessing this with you. It's something very similar to that we can offer ourselves. So by clearing the space and then really just being present as that wave of intensity visits, we are doing something really powerfully healing, even if in the moment we don't recognize that we're doing that. We're giving ourselves the space that we need to move through and then eventually out of a really intense experience. Now, imagine that instead of doing that, we just pushed it aside and went along our day. We just kept driving in our car and shoved this intensity deep inside. What we know, often from experience, but what any therapist will also tell you from experience with their clients and with themselves, is that ends up really derailing the healing process. It elongates it, it sort of pushes the work back further, and it makes it so that later on, when the next wave hits, it's gonna hit harder. It makes it so that if we keep ignoring the waves, that it ends up turning into this crisis point, a tsunami experience where we can't ignore it. It's so big. It's almost like our nervous system is saying, you've been ignoring the smaller signals, so I'm gonna have to send you a signal so big that you can't ignore it. So this is what we end up setting ourselves up for when we don't do that work in the moment. Granted, we can't always stop what we're doing to do the work. Like if you're in the middle of a job and you're at work and you have to continue to be in that role, then setting aside time for the work that I'm describing may need to be delayed until later in the day. But even when it needs to be delayed, we stop and we sort of send an inward signal to ourselves that says, I see this. I see that this is happening. I am going to be sitting with this later. So it's almost like what a parent would do with a child who's melting down, and in the moment there is no way to really be immediately responsive because maybe mom is driving in the car, dad is driving in the car, and they just can't stop immediately, and they're on the freeway. So they're sending signals to the back seat. I know, buddy. I know. I'll be there in a minute. Let me find some space and then in some time, and I'll pull over. So we do this similar thing with ourselves. We sort of say, you are a priority. I am listening, and I'm gonna find time to sit with this as soon as possible, right? Very different than burying something. Very, very different. So what I want to highlight in terms of next steps is that this gets easier and easier and easier the more you do it. And the time that you need to spend doing it gets less and less, because what happens is that really vulnerable, wounded side of ourselves starts to trust that we actually will be there. So in the beginning, when we first start this work, often what's happening and why it's so challenging is A, it's new, so it's a new muscle that we're learning to strengthen. But B, that wounded side of us does not trust us. Perhaps for years it's learned that we never listen when it shows up in pain. We always push it aside. So there's this ruptured relationship between us and this very vulnerable child on the inside that carries a lot of our deep feeling and pain. And some of the initial work and why it may be so hard in the beginning is because there needs to be some time spent toward repairing that ruptured relationship between us and ourselves, our younger inner child self. The way that we repair it is simply by doing the work consistently, similarly to a parent and child relationship where there has been a loss of trust. When there's been a loss of trust between a parent and child, and let's say they enter therapy, family therapy, there's a period of time where the child is not going to initially trust the parent's new willingness to be present and attuned. They're going to say, okay, sure, I'll believe it when I see it, right? And then my recommendation to the parent would always be, this is your time to show up consistently so that they start to see that you really mean it, right? Similar to that, when we engage in this work in a really routine and predictable way for this wounded part of ourselves, it eventually learns, wow, this is new. She or he really seems to be committed to this new way of being, this way of listening, this way of being really responsive. I can maybe trust this. And then the signals get less intense because they know that I can send a subtle signal, a more subtle signal, and I know they'll hear it. And so I don't need to knock them on their knees every time and insist that I get their attention. I can send a message in a smaller way. Maybe it's a flutter in the heart. Maybe it's this tightness in the chest. It's something somatic though. It's often a somatic signal. And I know they're going to feel it and say, I felt that, and I'm going to sit with that. I'm going to look into what that's about, and I'm going to get curious and responsive to what I just felt there and get the information that I need from you about what this meant and what you need me to do about it. So that's the next thing, is sometimes after we've listened and sat with ourselves through a difficult experience, sometimes that's enough, and that's the end of the process until we need to do it again. But sometimes after we've done that, it's clear that there is a next step. Just like with parenting, if a child is really having a hard time, sometimes they just need us to sort of get on the ground and be with them through their while they ride out their big wave of emotion. And then they're done. Like maybe they were just tired and needed someone to do that with them. But other times we may do that and hear in the process from them that something's going on for them that's actually needing to be addressed in the world. So then after, this nervous system response has closed, the loop has closed, we're back in this place of calm and relaxation. We're no longer in fight or flight. We've sat through that initial wave. A thing to stop and ask ourselves is, what do I need to do about this, if anything? Does this imply that I need to take some sort of step to advocate for this part of myself that just told me some really important new information? Is there a step of self-advocacy that's needed, is really the question. And sometimes that means, yes, I can tell I need to set a boundary with whoever, this situation involved. Or, yes, I can tell I need to have a vulnerable conversation with this person who exists out in the world, who this part of me was really hurting in response to something that had happened with them. Or maybe you're hearing in the process of sitting through it that, wow, I need to restructure my day because it's clear after I sat through this wave of emotion that the way that I've been structuring my day is too fast-paced and hectic, and I haven't been able to really attune as much. So I've been missing some cues, and now I'm realizing that, so I need to make some adjustments. So I just threw out a lot of examples of ways that we may need to take a step of advocacy, but it's not always the case. So this is something to just keep in mind as you're working on rebuilding trust in the relationship between you and this side of you that needs your care, your nurturance. So all of this to say, of course, on Mother's Day and every day, there is this need to really acknowledge and celebrate and harness the energy and power that's available to us at all times in the form of maternal nurturance, support, guidance, and it's all work that's happening in here. I just want to add on one more layer before I end this video. And that is because this account is so much about bringing the spiritual into the work. This is an area that calls for an understanding about what's happening spiritually. When we show up for ourselves, for our wounded self that's holding a lot of big feeling, when we go through this process that I described in this video, when we make ourselves available to us in that way, it feels like it's us doing the work, but really we're not. What we're really doing is opening ourselves up to this bigger source of nurturance and love that's available and that surrounds us at all times. And we're simply opening up, it's almost like a portal to that energy, and we're allowing it in. We're pulling it in from source, from your higher power, whatever you want to call that energy, and then we are embodying it and applying it toward our own healing and growth. Whenever we love someone else, whenever we show grace to someone else, whenever we pour healing energy into someone or something, even when we're loving on our pets and growing our garden in the backyard, we are really in those moments simply a portal for this bigger source of or pool of love and healing energy. And where our bodies are basically like an antenna, drawing that in and pouring it, targeting it toward a specific person or task. So the same applies when we're doing this sort of reparenting, healing work with ourselves. We really are in those moments, not alone in the process of loving on our wounded self. We are simply partnering with our guidance, with our spiritual team, with Source, with God, with the universe. We're partnering with them in order to bring this energy of healing and love and support into these moments. Once I became aware or acknowledged that that's what was happening, it took the power of those moments up about 50, 100 notches. It became so much more than just a somatic practice for me. It became a spiritual practice for me. And so when we start to do that more and more and recognize that this is actually a practice to connect with our higher guidance and connect with source energy, suddenly we are engaged in growing our spiritual practice all the time. Really, anytime that we notice that we're harnessing this energy and channeling it toward another, we are engaged in our spiritual practice. There's something about that then starts to alter the way we navigate our lives and the way we navigate the world in general. So this is me ending the video on a note of, don't minimize the power, the amazing and transformational power of beginning to take the first steps in this direction. It is just mind-blowing what can unfold on the heels of this kind of work when there's dedication and commitment to the process. Know that you are doing yourself such a huge favor in terms of building more resilience to get through hard times and building the confidence to know that you can and will really be able to tackle anything. Like, you're unstoppable. This is unstoppable energy that you're calling in when you commit to this sort of work. I really hope this was helpful. Please feel free to comment and share any thoughts that you had as you were watching this video. And I'd love it if you wanted to share with somebody who you think might benefit from watching it. Take really good care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you soon.